So when you stopped in Vegas, what was your long-term thought at that point?
Well, when I started Vegas, I thought that would be it. That would be the last time that I would ever get involved with live production again. And because I'd struggled so hard to get my voice back, and the amount of work that it took just to do that, which was a very stable environment. You know, you're not traveling all the time. The production quality was outstanding. I knew that I would never get that again outside of a room like that. So I figured this would be it. This would be my last, experience on a live concert stage. Mm-hmm. And I made the most of it. I really went all out with the production and had so much fun with it. I really went to town on that, and it was such a great experience. But by the time I got to the end of the Las Vegas Caesars residency, I built a new confidence that I could continue doing it. And then I went on tour. So one thing led to the other,
Now, I don't think everybody understands when you talk about your voice and whatever, you actually had a physical condition. Mm-hmm. How frightening was that?
Well, I still have it. It's permanent because this rooted from Lyme's disease, mm-hmm. from a tick. And so I had Lyme's disease. I was on tour actually when I got this years ago, during my very last tour, at the end of my last tour. And it just devastated my vocal quality, my projection, everything. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. Mm-hmm. I only really recently discovered it through this process of
mm-hmm.
Vegas and everything like that. Anyway, so there's a lot of tests that you can get done. The one particular test that identifies the function of the vocal cords in association with the nerves is there's 5 long needles that go into your larynx. It's a very awkward test, but you just got to do it.
5 needles they put in your larynx?
They put in your larynx.
Gross.
Yeah.
I think I'd just go, I don't want to sing anymore.
I know, but I was so determined. I was so determined to find out what was happening, because it's not the typical singer's voice. I don't have nodules or anything like that.
Well, you can't tell by listening to you. So that's why I had to ask, because even on your recent performance in Coachella, whatever, you're singing great. So whatever you got through it. You brought a horse to Las Vegas.
Yes.
What could possibly go wrong?
I know. I'm a risk taker, that's for sure.
What's the worst thing that happened with the horse? Because I got a bunch of horses. They're crazy. I mean, they're not as bad as goats, but...
Well, the one horse, we had a very narrow path going out to the center of stage on this one horse, and we would trot, full-on trot right out to the center of the stage. The thing is that the path was so narrow, and on the left side was a curtain, and somebody behind that curtain this one time moved the curtain, spooked him, and he went off the stage just into the light bay. Not into the audience, but the audience.
I know where that is. I do that too. I'm just not on a horse.
Oh my gosh!
But she didn't fall down or anything. So
he fell down. Went down, and when he was down, it was easy for me to just hop right off. We all stayed calm. The horse stayed calm. I stayed calm. I mean, when I watch it back, it's incredible. And you're a horseman, so you know. And I think instinctively, when you ride horses long enough, you're going with whatever it is they're doing.
Stuff just happens.
Stuff just happens. And he went down, and I just went with him and stayed cool and calm. And so he stayed cool and calm.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you panic as the rider,
right,
I think that's the end right there.
And he got up and
he just got up and
walked off?
Carried on. No, we carried on with our...
What
segment.
happened? I didn't get to see that show.
Well, he...
I mean, so what? Then what? When you carried on, did you get back on
We just led him to the destination after that, because it was like halfway point. And you know what?
And his knees were skin up?
No, nothing. Not a mark.
Really?
Mm-mm.
Wow, amazing.
Not a mark.
All right, so moving forward, as a writer, I'm very impressed just at... I mean, I wrote songs for a living for 10 years before I met Ronnie. And... the big, you can call it a scapegoat or, the sharing. The way you can always write is with a co-writer. Because, you call up your buddies, they come over. If nothing else, you have coffee and you talk about what's going on in the world. And some days you make something rhyme, and some days it's a hit, as you know, and some days it's not. But you wrote this whole thing by yourself. So how many days would you go to, you had your room or wherever, and you went in there and you stared at a piece of paper and you weren't in the mood, or what?
I'm not a disciplined writer in the sense that I decide when I'm going to write. I just write when it comes. So I'm not very good at
I call it perspiration and inspiration.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I'm not very good at writing appointments. I don't set a time to write. I just, when the ideas come, then I sit down and dedicate myself till I'm satisfied, or usually till I'm exhausted. I like to write in a solitary environment. I always have anyway. Even when I was doing all that co-writing, it was Mutt and I co-writing for 15 years. And I would go off always on my own anyway and write my own ideas, and then we would bring our ideas together. It wasn't like we were just collaborating from scratch on everything. I like solitude when I write, and that's when I really get deep into my thoughts, and I just do better that way. I wouldn't be a good, I don't know, I've never really tried a social writing environment, like what you're talking about, like getting together with friends and jamming things down. I probably would enjoy that. I've just never done that.
Really?
I've always written in solitude.
You're probably the only real artist I can think of that's actually sold records, which means really connected internationally. I mean, we've toured in Australia. We have a fan base there, here and there. But you've toured all over the world and sold all over the world. What do you think it is about your music that connects on an international level?
I mean, I don't really know. I think when I try to figure it out, because it is interesting that why these things happen. But I grew up with a very eclectic music in a very eclectic music environment. So my parents' music was, country from the 60s, country music from the 60s. And then there was, the pop music that was on the radio. And in Canada, that was also very eclectic. There was a lot of folk music during that time. But then, there was the big vocal arrangement groups like the Bee Gees and the Beach Boys, and the Carpenters. That really influenced me a lot. And then, the R&B music was a huge influence too. The soul stuff. I mean, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and the whole Motown thing, and Stevie Wonder. So I loved it all, and each genre had something for me that I was passionate about. And then my own writing was really just a hybrid of all of that influence. And then there were the rock bands that I was really into, like I was into Fleetwood Mac, and I was into the Eagles, and it just, gosh, and then by the time the 80s came around, in the 90s, I was into Def Leppard and, AC/DC and all that sort of stuff. So I always just took the best of whatever I was attracted to, regardless of the genre. I was never a genre-specific listener. And I just think that my writing always came out in my writing. So I think maybe at the root of it, probably the writing. I mean, Dolly Parton was one of my greatest storytelling teachers, for example. Listening to her growing up. I love the way she put stories together. And the same with Willie Nelson, great storyteller, and Chris Christopherson.
Noble heroes there.
They were really Waylon Jennings. I mean, the repeats that I've, the songs I put on repeat with all of those artists. And then, some more on the storytelling. But then when it came to the musical style and direction, I was always very attracted to minor chords, which is not typically a country thing, for example. So I'm attracted to minor
chords. Unless you like bluegrass.
Well, I love bluegrass. I mean, the whole folk and bluegrass thing is an addiction for me.
Country jazz.
That's to me. That is soul music right there. Bluegrass is soul music, and the storytelling, but the grooves, and I love the time signature changes in bluegrass. I love it, which is not very typical in country. The time signature changes.
True.
So I'm just passionate about making music. It doesn't matter what the genre is, and I think every genre has its soul anyway, and I'm attracted to that. So I drew from every genre different elements. And I used to accompany my uncle, who was a fiddler, and he would play all these, a lot of bluegrass stuff. And I was just trying to keep up with him as the guitarist,
You're going too
fast. And the key changes and the time signature changes. I'm like, but it really stuck with me, and I've always loved it. And the harmonies, you just can't get any better than that. I just love those cluster harmonies and
bending harmonies and all that kind of stuff.
All of that, beautiful, yeah.
You got a couple of teenagers now. You got a boy, you got a girl in the house. What kind of new chaos is that creating for you?
Well, my stepdaughter is the quiet one. She's very quiet and cool. And then my son is the more outgoing, bold personality. His passion is also music. He fell into that on his own and has his own world in music. But you know what? I love being a parent. I love my domestic life. I love to cook. I love sit-down dinners and just being together as a family. And
for a lot of us growing up in this world, though, and, there is always that challenge of you want your kids to have a sense of normalcy. And I know something about your background, and mine even here. I swept floors for the first year I was in town, just trying to make rent. And Barbara and I lived out of a coffee can. It was, are we gonna go get a couple of beers tonight, or are we going to get bread and milk for tomorrow? We're on a big decision, But our world really hasn't changed that much. But obviously, the point is, you want your kids to have some sense of doing it on their own, And how do you balance that from not giving them everything you want to give them, things that you didn't have, to letting them have the joy of doing it by themselves?
That's right. They have to develop on their own. I think, interfering with their development is a mistake. They have to have that independence. I mean, my son, Asia, he's in music on his own, by his own choice. He doesn't get any influence from us. He is dedicated like crazy to it. He spends all his spare time making music. He's self-taught. The programming is very complex, and he, spends hours learning, reading, and I can't help him with any of that stuff. I don't know the level of technology that he does.
Me either, yeah.
I'm on a program. I use Pro Tools, and he's now moved on to something called Ableton 9, which is way beyond me. I'll never get there. And so he's very, very serious and devoted to this on his own. It's what he wants to do, and he dedicates. And it's a lot of hard work. He'll spend days just on a drum sound. I would never do that. I'm more of a songwriter. I'm more of a writer. I'm not. He's a genuine producer and arranger. He does very complex things. But so it's his dedication. He's dedicated to it. And if he wants to spend, 2 weeks on an arrangement, 3 weeks. Sometimes he'll spend the whole summer on an arrangement.
Yeah.
So that's dedication. You can't. I'm not sure you can teach that to someone. I think that they've,
Agree.
They've got he's got that in him.
Agree.
And I don't push them. I think if you push them towards something, then maybe they never get to discover that dedication on their own.
But when you see them locked in on something besides nonsense or just partying all the time or laying around in bed all day, I think that's where the comfort zone is. Because that's how it is with my kids.
He is not a lay around in bed all day kid.
My kids are like that too. They're workers.
Every morning. Yeah, he's a doer. He's up every morning. He's the first one up every morning, and he's just a doer anyway. And maybe, I think we can teach by example. Mm-hmm. But our kids are they're their own people. They're their own person. And so how can you really influence them more than just being a good example yourself?
Don't you think they're kind of born that way too?
Well, like, yeah, they are born with their own character.
Yeah.
You know, and they have to take responsibility for that. You know, we can't just say that, you know, they can't say, well, it's because of my parents. You know, I don't blame my parents for, you know, my shortcomings. And I had a really difficult childhood, and I just don't hold it against them. You know, they did their best.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.